On today's show, we'll be joined by Jonathan Feigen from the Houston Chronicle to discuss a lineup speculation after day 2 of Houston Rockets training camp, what we've been able to glimpse from some of the scrimmage lineups that we've seen through 2 days of training camp. We'll also take a look at some of the new defensive expectations and adjustments for this Houston Rockets team, as well as Jalen Green's overall growth going into this year. All that and more coming up right here at Locked On Rockets.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start.
The Houston Rockets select Jalen Green and Jabari Smith Jr.
T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal.
Every time I step on that floor, I'm coming.
You're getting somebody who's going to come in with a chip on their shoulder, somebody who's going to come in and compete from day one.
6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
What's up, and welcome to another edition of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian and credentialed media member. I'm also the host of Locked On NBA Mondays, host of the State of the Rockets podcast, as well as Rockets Watch. Be sure to follow along on Twitter at JT Gatlin, and the show, of course, at Locked On Rockets. We are free and available on all podcast platforms, including YouTube. Joining us now is Houston Rockets beat writer for the Houston Chronicle, none other than Jonathan Feigen. Jonathan, it's training camp. It's that magical time of year where optimism is incredibly high. Teams feel really, really good. There are 30 championship quality teams in the NBA this time of year, every single year. It's a fantastic time, and we got to set some, expectations, right? Obviously, this Rockets team, not going to be a championship quality team, but the optimism is still there, and rightfully so. This is a young, energetic group of guys. They have a lot of optimism to at least improve upon where they were last season, and a big part of that is building forward with these young rookies, with guys that they just brought in, Jabari Smith Jr., Tari Eason, Ty Washington. But we've had 2 days worth of training camp now. A lot to kind of dissect from these first 2 days, maybe surprisingly so a little bit. I wasn't exactly sure what all kind of content we would be able to talk about, different storylines, but one of the big things that I haven't had a chance to talk about yet on the show is we had kind of a glimpse at a little bit of the Rockets scrimmaging from day 1 of training camp, and we saw different groups in that training camp scrimmage. And the group number 1 that I wanted to kind of focus on here with you for a moment is we had the 4 projected starters that everybody's had projected, which is Jalen Green, Kevin Porter Jr., Alperen, Sengun, and Jabari Smith. Those were 4 of the 5 members of the first, team 1, if you will. And then Eric Gordon was the 5th member of that group. Now, they started mixing up the guys, as the scrimmage was wrapping up. But should we read into this as Eric Gordon potentially being the de facto 5th guy, the starter, if you will, with the rest of those guys?
Well, I would think it's very likely that's the case. And you absolutely should not read into it. I mean, they scrimmaged for how many hours in the past 2 days? They had a second practice yesterday. They had a long practice today. Of the second practice and that long 2 hours of scrimmaging today, we saw a total of, let me add it up, 0 minutes. So, no, you do not need to read into the minute. We happen to say, well, we saw 5 minutes. That said, no, that probably makes a lot of sense. That very well could be the starting lineup. Eric's their best player right now. Jalen will be. Eric is. And maybe Jalen will be as soon as the season starts. But, Eric is really good. And one way or another, they want to get him starters minutes. One way to do that is to start him.
And that's been such a, kind of just a topic amongst Rockets fans the entire offseason is, we've had these 4 guys penciled in as 4 of the 5 starters, and it's that gigantic question mark of who do you go with, right? Do you go with Eric Gordon, the proven veteran, arguably, if not, to your point, right, still the best player on the team on any given night when he decides he wants to be? But then you also have a guy in Jae'Sean Tate who clearly has earned the trust and the confidence of head coach Stephen Silas, stepped into the starting lineup 10 games into his rookie career and hasn't looked back since then, has been a focal point, a key piece for Stephen Silas, for this coaching staff. I mean, how do you weigh those 2 guys and what they each individually bring to the table, and then maybe potentially trying to accentuate the other guys in the starting lineup. To me, I thought it was going to be Jae'Sean Tate for a long time, and I kind of settled into the idea of I think Eric Gordon just makes more sense and is a better fit for what they're trying to achieve with those starters.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense to have him on the floor with Alperen Sengun, but it also works very easily with a rotation if you're going to have Jabari Smith Jr. as your backup center, and there's a very good chance of that. So you have Jae'Sean Tate come in for Jabari Smith Jr. at like the 6-minute mark, and then stay on the floor when Jabari returns for Alperen Sengun. And that way, Jae'Sean Tate plays starters minutes also, that 28 to 32 range. It's a nice, easy way to make that work. And that way also, as Jae'Sean Tate stays on the floor longer, when one of those guards comes out, you got another guy who can handle, another guy who initiates offense. He's on the floor with Jabari when who gives you some shooting, which maybe isn't so much of Jae'Sean Tate's thing, although obviously he's trying to improve with that. It just is a nice rotation. It makes a lot of sense.
Does that calculus potentially change at all? I mean, we heard about Jae'Sean Tate. He talked a little bit about putting in the work this offseason, trying to improve that three-point shot. I mean, if Jae'Sean Tate comes into the season and he's suddenly shooting 35, 36, 37% consistently from behind the three-point line, do you suddenly maybe shift things and you're like, well, for everything else he provides, he makes, maybe a little bit more sense in that starting three spot because that's more so his natural position, right? Eric Gordon is effectively playing out of position or playing up a position if you're having him on the wing at the three.
No, I don't know if it makes more sense. I mean, because he's taller, he's an inch taller. Eric is an outstanding low post defensive player. Really, really good. Now, he doesn't rebound like a big man. But that remains to be seen. How will they rebound with Alpi as the starting center? Jabari Smith Jr. could be a pretty good rebounder. He showed, at least in Las Vegas, he looked very determined to hit the boards, and he did a good job. But obviously, that's something that will have to play out. But other than that, it doesn't necessarily make more sense to say Eric as a pseudo three, and not to mention, Jalen Green is the 6'6" guy. So if you're looking at that kind of thing, Jalen's not a big guy, but he is long and he can do better rebounding too. You can make it work. Hey, there's no rush to make those decisions. You could see how things play out, as I'm sure listeners have already thought and will quickly point out. There's a chance Eric Gordon will not retire with the Rockets. So that could come up at some point. And so that can work itself out.
And I'm glad you bring up that point, right? Because Eric, when talking to us today at day 2 of training camp, he kind of reiterated, right, that he has a certain level of play that he is accustomed to, right? A certain level that he wants to be at, and the way that he can impact the team, and that he is simultaneously, right? He is the vet on the floor. He is trying to teach and bring along these young guys, but he still also has to do his own job, right? He has expectations that he sets forward for himself as to how he wants to play on a nightly basis, his way to impact the team. And I wonder, what that life is like for him, right? Kind of trying to straddle those two roles, right? Being the veteran on the floor, being the coach on the floor, if you will, as he, alluded to on media day, but then also still trying to be a productive member and potentially, right, maybe showcasing his talents, right, to other teams out there in the association. Like, hey, I've still got it. I could still be a contributing member to a winning basketball team, not just somebody whose job is solely shepherding the young guys around.
Yeah, I don't know that there's a lot of showcasing going on. People kind of know who he is by now. And he's coming off an outstanding season. So there's, probably the best shooting season of his career. And he was getting to the rim. And he defends at his usual level. So I don't know about that. I don't know that he's trying to get another job. But I think it was interesting the way he described that. Hey, I'm a basketball player too. I want to play really well. And there's value in that, where people always talk about what does a veteran bring to a really young team? And, oh, he brings his work ethic and his professionalism, and he's in the weight room, and that's all good. And you can do that with your 12th man. You don't have to do that with your starter, although it's better when it comes from somebody who's really good. But when he was talking about that today, it did strike me as, yes, he's also showing a standard. This is what a really good NBA player looks like every day at practice. While he's beating up on you guys who can jump out of the gym, which, by the way, he can't, that's because he's an NBA player, and that's what you are just now starting to be. It's performance, not just professionalism. That it's good to have some. I mean, the Heat keep Adonis Haslem around year after year after year, and it's on minimum contracts to never play because of the professionalism and all that sort of thing. That's good. But if you're going to have a guy who starts and who makes starters money and so on, there's value in, hey, he's really good and he's determined and driven to be really good. That's still there. Eric is never going to be the really loud, talkative leader type. He's not going to pull people aside. He's sure not going to chew out somebody in front of the group. He's not going to be Chris Paul of a leader. But there is an example, and it's not just showing up on time and lifting weights and being professional. It's also in just kicking butt at practice today.
I've been a proponent again. It kind of felt like this has been a back and forth discussion for a long time of what is Eric Gordon's future with this team, right? What is his role? How long will he remain a member of the Houston Rockets? And I kind of started to buy into the idea, maybe it was about 2 months ago or so, where I thought, you know what, if you're looking at the trade market, especially the way the trade market looks in the NBA right now, with a couple different teams out there kind of fire selling different role players, what have you, the Utah Jazz tearing it all down, the Spurs tearing it all down. If the most you can get is a super duper late first round draft pick for a guy of Eric Gordon's quality, how much does that really help you in the grand scheme of things versus what he actually gives you as a basketball player, right? You mentioned the intangibles and stuff, the leadership, all that, but actually him on the court, I think he elevates the floor and makes guys like Kevin Porter Jr. and Jalen Green better. He makes life easier for them to where they can then have a modicum of success. I don't think he's going to single-handedly raise the win total 12 games or something by himself, but he puts those guys in positions to experience success situationally, and that allows them to elevate their game.
I think you put it well in that he can help them win more games, and people can argue about the value of winning more games, but he can help players become better players. And that's the point. There's different ways you can help young players become better players. Yes, there's spacing and things like that that allow Jalen Green to go to the rim better. But there's also that standard of practice that I was talking about before that can help young players become better players. It's valuable to have some veterans who can do that. And then in terms of what you can do in a trade, you just got to think at some point a contender will say, that's a guy who can help put us over the top. I mean, the Rockets in their contending years were always way better when Eric was playing and when Eric was producing the way he can. That's when, wow, they're really dangerous. He can do that. I'm surprised no one has offered up the kind of picks the Rockets would have to take. I mean, maybe they have, and the Rockets didn't see things the way I do, but you just still think at some point, some contending team is going to say, it's a thick pack of contenders. This guy can help us move from that pack. And the other part about it is he can fit with anybody. He can handle a little bit. He's not a tremendous facilitator, but he can definitely handle. He can drive. He can catch and shoot. He's good with the ball. He's good without the ball. He can defend at a variety of positions, and he defends really well. Who doesn't that fit with? I mean, everybody has use for that. So you just got to assume at some point somebody makes that kind of offer.
fits with every team in the NBA, and I'm right there with you. I'm kind of shocked that there hasn't been a contending team that has come knocking. I definitely had the Phoenix Suns as pegged as a potential team that should come knocking for Eric Gordon somewhere down the line, but things are being dismantled rather quickly in Phoenix. So we'll see if that team's even, worth having that discussion with further down the line as we approach the trade deadline this season. But coming up, I want to talk about the potential shift in defensive scheme for the Houston Rockets team this season. We're going to get there after a quick message from our friends over at BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for all of your football betting info and needs this season. Find all the latest player developments, matchups, news, podcasts, in-depth analysis, and articles on every single game that you can find. And as always, BetOnline remains your continued source for all of your sports wagering information, from live betting and even up-to-the-minute scores for every single sport out there. They've got you covered for MLB postseason. NBA is right around the corner. They've got all your fighting odds, UFC, MMA, boxing, you name it. They've got you covered over at BetOnline. Right now, you can take a look at who the title favorites are at BetOnline for this NBA season. Golden State Warriors, unfortunately, leading the way at plus 575. Boston Celtics coming in second at plus 600, even after all the Ime Udoka situation. The Milwaukee Bucks locking it in at third at plus 700. And then rounding out the top five, you have the Brooklyn Nets and the Los Angeles Clippers at plus 750 apiece. So for all of that and more odds, head over to betonline.net to learn more about the trends and action available to you. BetOnline, it's where the game starts. And continuing on here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast, home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. Continuing our conversation with Jonathan Feigen. Now, Jonathan, we've heard this a few times now from Stephen Silas talking about some new defensive adjustments with things that they're trying schematically, and then we've tried to follow it up a couple times with some of the players, and nobody's really given us too much. Nobody's trying to expose.
I've tried, haven't I?
Yeah,
I keep pushing.
I first off, I respect it. It's just like akin to last season. Just whether it was game 1 or game like 67, just every so often, just taking a shot to see if Stephen would let us know what his starting lineup was going to be. Just probing, just to see if he changed his mind. Maybe made a mental shift in the middle of the season. You know what? Sure, I'll give it to him tonight. They can know who the starters are. But I do think that the one thing that has been repeated multiple times now is they've talked about the idea of helping more. And I find that interesting because last season, one of the areas that Stephen discussed that was problematic for them defensively was over-helping, right? That was something that he pointed out routinely, was that it wasn't necessarily for lack of effort defensively. Like, this was a young team. They wanted to be good defensively, but it was more a conceptual thing, just being in the wrong spots, not rotating, closing out too hard, not closing out well enough, all these different things. And so I find it really, really interesting that they've gone from this dynamic last season where they were over-helping to this season where if they're making helping more of a priority, I wonder if that's, because of guys like Jabari Smith Jr., who has really good defensive IQ, good defensive instincts, and kind of understands how and where to help, when to help, that kind of thing. And if that's just overall kind of elevating their capabilities defensively, almost seemingly overnight.
Yeah, and I think they're maybe better suited for that because there's some length now. There's some more length going to be on the floor. I thought last year when it came to helping, the issue wasn't so much the helping as helping the helper, the next rotation. I thought they could do that. And then the other thing you find a lot, especially with switching teams, which they are to a degree, and that's in the current NBA to a degree. Compared to 5 years ago, they switch like crazy. Compared to the current NBA, they switch a lot. But what you find with switching teams, you don't want to do it out of convenience. Here, you got them. You want to be up on the ball and you want to be, and I think that might be what they're not saying so much as when they help or when they switch, be disruptive. Don't just pass them on like it's a relay race and you're passing the baton to the next guy. No, you got to still defend. You got to get up on a guy. And I'm guessing this because, as you said, I've asked 20 different ways and gotten 0 different answers other than, yes, we're doing some more things, but we really don't want to tell you exactly what yet. In fact, I joked with Jalen Green, all right, fine, I'll go to the games. He got it. I appreciated the fact he got my joke there. But I'm guessing that that's what we're talking about more, is being more disruptive on the switches, on help. Don't just be there and don't just pass the guy off to the next guy to defend, but to get up in them. And then, of course, the helper thing that I thought was an issue all year last year. And you know what? The other thing, and maybe I'm going in a different direction, but in a lot of ways, the two biggest issues with their defense wasn't even the defense so much. It was their offense, where they were way, way ahead of the rest of the league in turnovers and in points allowed off turnovers. I mean, they allowed so many more points off turnovers from the second worst team at that. That gap was the same as that second worst team, the Kings, to the third best team in the league, the Memphis Grizzlies. That's how many more points per game they allowed off turnovers than everybody else. The difference between 29 and 30 was the same as the difference between 3 and 29. So to me, yes, but you can look closer and find some real issues with their defense that had nothing to do with everything. Like when you take those away and you look at the middle of the shot clock, 7 seconds to 15 seconds, they were still like 25th defensively. They weren't great. They were better, and they were much better after the All-Star break. And then the other problem, defensive rebounding, where they gave up way too many second shots and too much second points. And those two things alone aren't about help. They aren't about switching. They're about other things that you have to tighten up as young players become veteran players.
And I've kind of had them paint it first off that the turnover stat absolutely blows my mind. That's not something that I had seen or picked up on last season. I mean, very clearly they were quite turnover prone. I still
you
remember...
will see it in the paper in the next couple days. I didn't just remember that.
There we go. There's a reason that stat's floating around. No, I love that stat. That's so informative. It reminds me of, there was a point last season, I forget which game it was, but Ryan Hollins was kind of fed up with all the turnovers, and the Rockets had committed like 2 or 3 straight turnovers in one game. And at one point, Ryan just said on the broadcast, he goes, "You know what? It's just better just walk the ball down and kick it into the stands, because then you can at least go back and set your defense, and you're not committing these live ball turnovers, which are they're just backbreakers, right?" And so the stat makes a lot of sense, and that's absolutely one of the reasons that they struggled defensively for sure. The defensive rebounding, though, I definitely think you can look at this team and have a reasonable level of confidence that is going to improve dramatically this season. When you look at last season, for the majority of their season, their front court was Christian Wood and an undersized Jae'Sean Tate, and now you're upgrading that front court to Alperen Sengun, who isn't quite like, he's not like a high point rebounder like Christian Wood, but he does the dirty work. He boxes out, uses his body well, even if he's only 6'9" or 6'10". Let's face it, he's not really 6'11", but he boxes out well, he uses his size well. And then you've got Jabari, who is a monster and who can use his height and his athleticism to close out defensive possessions strong on the glass.
Well, we'll see. Jabari, physically, does he stand up? He is very assertive going to the boards, and he defends well, and so he might rebound well. Alperen, especially defensive rebounding, it'll be difficult for him to be as good defensive rebounder as Christian Wood, but he will put a body on a guy. So if he does that but doesn't finish the with rebounds as regularly as Christian Wood does, then it becomes incumbent on the backcourt, on Jalen Green and Kevin Porter Jr., to get the rebounds, to come in and get the rebounds. That's the thing. Eric is not going to get a whole lot of rebounds. That's not his strength. But if you box out, if each guy boxes out, those two guys are so athletic, so talented, they ought to be able to come in and get some rebounds. Plus, it allows them to get it and go. And we know they like to do that. They got to get better. Defensive rebounding, there's a chance they can do that. But again, that remains to be seen.
Yeah, it kind of
remains to be seen, but there's reasons to wonder, that they have the potential in that. But I'm sure not going to say, okay, they got rid of their leading rebounder, they'll be better now. There are ways to go.
It is one of those, right, where we're with Christian Wood, and he's with Dallas now. I wish him all the best in his newfound sixth man role, which was a pleasant surprise for him, I'm sure, with new head coach Jason Kidd. Conversation for another day. But I do kind of look at it like, I do kind of look at it like the maybe like the OKC Thunder a little bit, where Steven Adams, was so effective at boxing out and securing rebounds, even if he wasn't the one actually securing the rebounds, but allowing the team the opportunity to get those rebounds by putting in the work and secure and holding off the opposing big, if you will. And that's kind of what I envision a little bit for Alperen Sengun in this role, with, like you said, Kevin Porter Jr., Jalen Green, two very athletic guards who can absolutely be monsters on the glass. And I do remember, I think that was a point of emphasis from Stephen Silas last year with Jalen Green about finding ways to use his athleticism to impact the game in other ways other than just being a blur in transition, but using his leaping ability to attack the glass to help out where he can.
Well, yeah, I think he has shown some determination and some understanding of that. So there's a chance. Now, there's Steven Adams comparison. I mean, you're talking about the strongest guy in the league, probably. And he really creates that kind of havoc on the offensive end, where it takes so many bodies just to keep him off the glass that other people came in and got offensive rebounds. That's why Oklahoma City and New Orleans and then Memphis, Oklahoma City especially, was just unbelievably good on the offensive boards. It was because of Steven Adams, even if he wasn't getting the rebound. It was a monster, to use your word. I don't know that, although I will say, Alpy on the offensive boards, he's got a real feel for it. He's got that old school watch the flight of the ball thing, which a lot of guys don't do, and very good hands. And so offensive rebounding, I could see him getting his share too.
Coming up, want to discuss Jalen Green, takeaways from what he discussed with us at day 2 of camp, as well as just his, the growth that we're kind of seeing from Jalen Green that we've heard about, the praise from head coach Stephen Silas. We're going to get there in just one moment. And final segment here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast, home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. Now, Jonathan, it does feel like, at least, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Jalen Green, when he's kind of interacting with media, discussing things with us, he feels maybe not quite night and day different from last year, but I think there's a certain maybe comfortability, confidence in some of his answers, that we've gotten from him so far this season at both media day and now training camp compared to last season. Maybe, last season a little bit more guarded at times with how he, discussed things with media, whereas this year it feels like he really is kind of embracing a bit more of just the answers kind of being a little bit more, I don't want to say elaborate in his responses, but am I off base here? Do you kind of sense that shift a little bit?
What I think you're seeing is he is more comfortable in the podium setting and the group setting. It's more like he was one-on-one. And the ones I had one-on-one throughout the year with him, he was very forthcoming and at ease, and you could joke and he would get it and, get it back to you. And, on a podium, the famous, you can move your lips. You don't, Jalen, it's okay. Speak out. He was cautious a little bit, and you're right that I think media day, and again, today would be more of a scrum. Media day would be a podium, but he was, I thought, more as what I experienced in more of the one-on-one interviews, which is who he is. I think he's a really good personality for the face of the franchise type, or the key to what they hope to become, in that he's ambitious and he's very determined. He's got the nice mix of tremendous confidence and some humility. Tremendous confidence, he absolutely believes he's going to get there. Some humility, and that he knows he's not there yet. That's a real nice mix to have to start your career. And I think that's what we have seen these last few days, where he knows who he is, and he knows what is hoped of him from this organization. I loved the way he worded that the other day. In fact, it was my question, where I said, what are your expectations for this year? And he said, to carry my team to more wins and hopefully get all-star. So I thought some of those words, carry my team, so that jumps out at you, and my team, the sense of responsibility, the understanding of what he can do. He can carry a team, and the sense of responsibility. My team. I thought the Rockets had to be in the back room going, yes, when he said stuff like that.
Yeah, no, he's had some really solid quotes in just, again, a very short amount of time compared to, and again, it does feel like he's kind of elevated that part. Not only is he's elevating his game on the court, he's elevating his game off the court. No, I kid, but it was interesting too to kind of hear him. Right, Stephen Silas alluded to the fact that day 2 of camp here, didn't go as smoothly as day 1. Right, talked about there were maybe some frustrations from some of the guys, mistakes being made. Turnovers, just little things, little breakdowns of communication that, maybe the guys weren't expecting after such a successful day 1. And Stephen spoke about some of those frustrations. And then so, I wanted to follow up with Jalen on that and just kind of gauge where, how guys are responding, to those frustrations. And I thought his answer was solid, right? He's just like, well, look, you got to take it on the chin, right? If Silas is calling you out because you're doing something wrong, because you're not in the right spot, or you're not where you're supposed to be, like, he's trying to teach us and, get us up to speed on so many different concepts, so many different things that, I thought it was just very illuminating that he was just very much matter of fact about, hey, like, if you're not doing the right thing, then that's on you. Like, you've got to get up to speed and you've got to, work it out. And it's not anything like it's your fault, my fault, whoever. There's not like blame being passed around, which I think is maybe something that could easily happen with a group of young guys like this. You're calling somebody out, you're saying, hey, you're doing this wrong. And guys could get temperamental very quickly, very frustrated very easily. And it seems like so far that at least that's not the case as far as how they responded to today's practice, at least.
Well, that, and I thought it was important, and I don't know, surprise, but important that these young guys who probably somewhere deep inside know, okay, we're still rebuilding, we're just finding our way in the NBA. That's no excuse, and you're going to get called out. If you got to be better. That's what's expected of you in the NBA. That, okay, yes, you're a rookie, but you're also an NBA player. And so if you don't do this right, the coach is getting on you. It's not just learn and do the best you can, and we're going to be patient. Yeah, that's part of it too. But you're still going to get called out too. Like I said, there's no surprise of that. That's what coaches do. But day 2, they got to find that out. That, yeah, this guy's going to get on me. It's not just, learn. It's okay. We understand. We could have both at the same time.
And I think, and to a degree, right, I love the fact that, Stephen, whenever he does discuss the process, right, the growth and how these guys are being brought along, he talks about patience a lot. And he does talk about the fact that there has to be a certain level of patience and understanding, but also a level of accountability. He spoke about this a lot at the end of last season, I believe during the exit interviews, kind of discussing the fact that, hey, we have now laid the foundation here, right, with guys like Jalen, Alpi, Josh, Usman, guys who are now coming back, and clearly, other guys that are also involved, everybody who's returning essentially. But that they've laid the foundation for what they want, the principles that they're trying to get the guys to adhere to. And now this year, there's maybe a little bit more of an understanding of, hey, last year was the first year, right? You made those mistakes last year. We tried to iron those out. If those same mistakes are being made this year, I kind of expect almost like a higher degree of scrutiny from the coaching staff, especially for the returning guys, to continue to try to build upon those principles that they laid the framework for last season.
Yeah, well, there's more guys who've been with the program for longer. And they started last year with 5 rookies. One of them was Jae'Sean, who really spent the year. He started the year with a 2-way and spent most of the year, and certainly by this part of the year, was with the Vipers. I mean, he went to training camp, but penciled in as a Viper, and that's where he was. But whether it's 4 or 5 rookies, now there's 3. And of those 3, 1 starts. And Kevin Porter Jr., okay, now you're in year 2, maybe year 2.5 as a point guard. You've been there for longer. More is expected of you. Certainly Jae'Sean Tate. Last year, Jae'Sean was just his 2nd year. Well, now you've had 2 years and you've played more games with this team than anybody else in the last 2 years. There's reasons to expect more in terms of understanding what they want to do. Hey, for that matter, they had 5 teenagers last year. Now they only have 1.
We call that growth and improvement, Jonathan.
You like that other stat? Here's one for you. When their 2nd oldest player began his career, that's Eric Gordon. They're young. The Boban is 5 months older, I think. 4 months older. 4 months older. So when their second oldest player was beginning his NBA career, their youngest player was beginning kindergarten.
Wow.
So there is a difference between, first of all, between what Jabari Smith is to start his career and the people he will be playing against. And in Eric Gordon's case, one of the guys he'll be playing with.
That is that is the second of most absurd. Like that again, two absurd stats in one podcast. You're going for a record here, Jonathan. I do appreciate it. I love that one. That one's more fun and kind of jaw dropping a little bit, just when you consider where this team is at with their respective ages and all of that. I love that stat. But do me a favor, Jonathan. Let all of our listeners know where they can track you down. And I'm sure the majority of them, if they're listening to this podcast, they have to be following your work. But it's part of the drill. So let them know where they can track you down at.
Well, thank you for that. Yes, everything goes on HoustonChronicle.com. Couldn't be easier. Just go HoustonChronicle.com, and there's a tab for sports and a tab for Rockets, and take you right there. Or if you follow me on Twitter, I'm pretty good at remembering to tweet links for everything. But even if I don't, the automated tweet will come a little later. But there's always the automated tweet with a link to everything. And my Twitter handle is my name, Jonathan_Feigen, Feigen. So you can go there on Twitter anytime, and it takes you right to the stories. But either way, you go to HoustonChronicle.com, you get a whole lot more. But I appreciate that. Yeah, looking forward to another year. I was trying to figure this out. What is this now for me? Year 24, I think. Season 20. I think it's my 24th season. Wow. On the beat. Before that, in the championship years, I would help out in the playoffs, and that was really fun. All you had to do, you go on the road and write a sidebar after the game as fast as your fingers can type. That was pretty fun too. But been on the beat since 99, 2000 or 98, 99? I think 98, 99.
Yeah. Okay. So you I was a little worried there, because I thought I was going to have two recent guests, because I recently had Chris Gardner from the Houston Roundball Review on, and I asked him, I was like, Chris, how long have you been doing this? And he goes, well, covering Rockets, he goes 27, 28 years. And I was like, wow, you've been covering the Rockets longer than I've been alive. And so you don't quite have Chris beat, at least as far as being on the Rockets beat directly. So that makes me feel a little bit better about being the youngster of the group, if you will.
Yeah. Well, okay.
I'm the Jabari Smith of the group. I'll take it. And then you can be the Eric Gordon of the group. There we go. That's how this thing works. But Jonathan, I do appreciate you taking the time to be here with us on the show today.
Well, it's my pleasure.
That's going to do it for another edition of Locked On Rockets. As always, appreciate you for checking out the show. If you haven't done so yet, please consider subscribing wherever you listen to your podcast. That's Apple, Spotify, Google, the Odyssey app, free and available on all podcast platforms. We're also on YouTube. Just go to YouTube, search Locked On Rockets. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. We look forward to having you back right here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.